Yeah, it is. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Dooley, Dean of the UTC Gary W. Rollins College of Business. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this special event hosted by the Scott L. Probasco Distinguished Chair of Free Enterprise. I would like to take a moment to thank our Probasco Chair, Dr. Claudia Williamson-Kramer, as well as our campus leadership, the UC Foundation, and the Probasco Subcommittee of the Foundation for their engagement and support. The Probasco Chair regularly brings notable scholars, practitioners, and thought leaders to the UTC campus to address topics critical to understanding the market economy. Past lecturers have included Nobel laureates, renowned economists, and even world leaders. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Arthur B. Laffer, one of the most influential economists of our time, as our esteemed speaker. The Probasco Chair of Free Enterprise was established in 1977 by initial bequest from the estate of Burkett Miller and is one of the largest endowed chairs of its kind in the nation. Its mission is to study the American free enterprise system, explore the conditions under which it operates most efficiently, and contribute to the public's understanding of economic theory and practice. The chair also oversees the Center for Economic Education and plays a key role in teaching and research within the Rollins College of Business. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the leadership of Dr. Claudia Williamson-Kramer, who holds the Probasco Chair of Free Enterprise and is a professor of economics. Her main research interests lie at the intersection of applied economic development and political economy. Dr. Williamson-Kramer has authored over 50 journal articles, co-edited 2 books, and written multiple book chapters, book reviews, and policy briefs. Her research has appeared in popular press outlets such as The Economist and the BBC. She currently serves as an editor for the Journal of Institutional Economics, on the editorial board of Public Choice, on the board of trustees for the Southern Economic Association, and on the board of fellows for the Institute of American Civics at the University of Tennessee. She has served as the 2022-2023 president of the Association of Private Enterprise Education and has served on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights Mississippi Advisory Committee. She is a native of West Virginia, earning her undergraduate degree in economics from Marshall University and her PhD in economics from West Virginia. She is a committed educator, teaching economics at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. And most recently, I want to share with you that she initiated and directs an undergraduate free enterprise scholars initiative in the College of Business called the Phillips Free Enterprise Scholarship Program, which teaches the values of free markets and individual liberty to shape future leaders who will advocate for personal responsibility, economic freedom, entrepreneurship, and innovation to fostering a more prosperous society. We are so fortunate to have her at the Rollins College of Business at UTC and in Chattanooga. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Williamson-Kramer.
Thank you, Dean Dooley, for that unnecessarily long introduction. Thank you all for coming out. And now it is my pleasure to get to introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Arthur Laffer. Dr. Arthur Laffer is the founder and chairman of Laffer Associates, an economics research and consulting firm. Dr. Laffer's economic influence in triggering a worldwide tax-cutting movement in the 1980s has earned him the title the father of supply-side economics. One of his earliest successes in shaping public policy was his involvement in Proposition 13, the groundbreaking California initiative that drastically cut property taxes in the state in 1978. Dr. Laffer was a member of President Reagan's Economic Policy Advisory Board for both of his 2 terms, was a member of the Executive Committee of the Reagan-Bush Finance Committee, and was a founding member of the Reagan Executive Advisory Committee for the presidential race of 1980. In 2019, Dr. Laffer was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Donald Trump. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Arthur Laffer.
Isn't she just wonderful? Claudia, thank you. I don't know if you know, she's from West Virginia. And here, I'm in fact not too far from my family home, which is in Hanover, Ohio, which is right at borders, the Columbiana counter borders, Pennsylvania and West Virginia. So it's not too far away. Claudia, thank you very much. And I also want to say hello to my dearest friend, Mike Madsen. Where are you, Mike? You're back here. Mike Madsen is one of my dearest friends who moved from Nashville. I've been working with Mike for, 40 years now, Mike?
30 years, 1 month, and 2 days.
Oh, but who's counting? Who's counting? But no, but it's great. Thank you, Mike, for coming. And thank you all for having me here today. And I do want to tell you just a little story. I love Chattanooga. It's a great city. It's adorable. I got here a little early. So, I went downtown, the old district downtown and wandered around a little bit. And there was this little bookstore in this old area of town. And the door was shut. And so I walked in. And, I'd look for old books. I just love them. So I opened up the door of the bookstore, and there was the proprietor of the store sitting behind his desk. As I opened up the door and he walked in, and I asked him, I said, "Excuse me, but by any chance, do you have Trump's latest book on how to get rid of illegal aliens?" The guy looked up at me and he said, "Get the heck out of here and don't come back." And I just turned to him and said, "Yep, that's the one. Do you have it in paperback?" I hope you don't mind me having some fun with you. And it is fun. There's way too much seriousness in this world, and I want to have a little fun with you, but I want to also make it very good economics. So I'm going to go through something with you today, if it's all right, rather than going through specifically this or specifically that and boring the living bejabers out of you. What I'd like to do is we economists are not of one mind. Economists have 2 different views at minimum, and maybe 20 different views. But what I'd like to do is juxtapose 2 groups, the 2 prominent groups today in the political battle. What I'd like to call the growthists, or supply-siders, or classical economists, if you want to call them that. And then the other group is the Keynesians, or the redistributionists, or the stimulus spendingers on the other side. These are basically the 2 dominant themes in economics, and they have been from time immemorial. You can go back to British history at the turn of the 19th century with Sir Robert Peel arguing against great taxation on consumption, great items of consumption. He warned Parliament, he said, "You will be thwarted in your expectations of revenue if you put these taxes on." You can see it in Adam Smith. You can see the debate there, all way, way back in time. There's some fun times too. Do any of you ever watch Parliament, how they yell at each other and scream at each other, insult each other horribly, and just waving handkerchiefs and doing all sorts of nasty things? The time was Gladstone, Prime Minister Gladstone, and his arch rival Disraeli. And, Gladstone was the supply-sider, the classical economist. Disraeli was the stimulus spending Keynesian, so, government spender. But the difference was that Gladstone was sort of a mumbly, fumbly type of guy. He didn't have great command of the English language. He wasn't wonderfully good in debates. And Disraeli had a hop on the fastball. He was really unbelievable. And he was just ripping the shreds out of Gladstone in one of these Parliament debates, and Gladstone was just frustrated beyond belief. And he turned to Disraeli and he said, "Sire, may you die in an asylum or from a social disease." And without a moment's hesitation, Disraeli retorted and said, "And that, my dear sir, would depend upon whether I embrace your policies or your mistress." Ouch. You go through the whole thing in U.S. history, you can see the debates going on in U.S. history. You can see it, with Wilson, and then you can see it with Harding and Coolidge. Then I'll take you through some of this. But these 2 groups have been battling from time immemorial. And I want to go through the intellectual structure of the 2 groups, and fun intellectual structure. I don't want to bore the bejabers out of you. But I do want to give you the perspective on the 2, and sort of why I'm a supply-sider, why I'm a growthist, why I'm a classical economist, what my colleagues on the other side, and I went to school with most of them, I went to school with Janet Yellen's husband, George Akerlof, who got the Nobel Prize on the Lemon Law. And I know all of these people really, really well. And I'm going to try to, and I also taught Keynesian economics at Stanford. So, you know, I'm familiar with the stuff. And I want to just go through so you see the differences in the two models, and you see how they affect policies, and why you get one group saying this and one group saying that. And if I can, to begin with the assumptions. I mean, the assumptions there, for the Keynesians, for the current Democratic Party, if you will, they believe people work because there are jobs. And you can hear it all the time. I created 40 million new jobs. I created 7 million new jobs. You know, they believe that people work because they're jobs. Now, to classical economists, me, I believe people work to get paid after tax. It's that very personal and very private incentive that motivates someone to get off their duff and get a job, get a good education, become a doctor, whatever it is, to earn higher pay, to quit one job, go to another job, that it's the after-tax incentive that motivates people. You can see the two discussions there, and you can see the policy implications. One group wants to cut tax rates, the other one wants to do spending programs on new projects. And you can see how that assumption really aligns. The second assumption underlying these two groups that's really very powerful is the Keynesians believe that people save because their incomes are high. There's this sort of saving function. You have the marginal propensity to consume out of spending there, and I'm going to go through a little bit of this with you. And what's not consumed is saved. And so the higher your income, the higher your savings will be, and that's what causes savings in the system. And the primary role, one of the primary roles of government is to supplement that savings if it's not there. That's clearly the Keynesian view. To us, it's a very different model. To us, people save to make an after-tax rate of return in order to augment their wealth. And it's two very different models. And if you look at the third area, which is tax revenues and funding of government, to the Keynesians, they believe that output is basically given. It's there, you know, there it is, it's output given. If you need more revenue, you've got to raise tax rates. That's straightforward. You see that. Every congressional budget office, all of these operates 100% this way. You follow me? To us, it's a different story. There's a relationship between tax rates, which they have deemed the Laffer curve, which is my profile a couple of years ago when I was tubby-wubby. But the tax rates have two effects on revenues. One is it's very true that when you raise tax rates, you do collect more revenue per dollar of tax base. That's very, very true. But there's a second effect, which we call the economic effect, which if you raise tax rates, you tend to reduce the reported income tax base because people use shelters or tax avoidance or loopholes or whatever else. And also they reduce the output of production of goods and services, move to a different location, whatever. And that these two effects, the arithmetic effect by collecting more revenue per dollar of tax base and the arithmetic effect of reducing the tax base, that these two effects always work in opposite directions. And sometimes when you raise tax rates, you will collect more revenues. The arithmetic effect dominates the economic effect. But sometimes when you raise tax rates, the economic effect dominates the arithmetic effects, and you actually lose tax revenues. That there are two tax rates associated with any given revenue. One is a high tax rate in the prohibitive range, and one is a lower tax rate in the normal range. You all follow me in the differences here and the assumptions? And I want to make sure you see these because they lead inextricably to the different conclusions that would come about in the system. And you can hear them and see them clearly. You know, if you look at it, the primary role of the government, the primary function of the state in the Keynesian view of the world, in the redistributionist view of the world, is to redistribute income in a fair and equitable way. That's their prime role. For those who have a little bit more, for those who are rich, you tax them, you give it to those who are poor. The rich have a little bit less, but heaven knows they can afford it. And if you give it to the poor, they need it so desperately that you're really helping. And that's the role of the state, is to redistribute. And it's not just with rich, poor, it's with regulations, it's with restrictions, it's requirements. All sorts of government policies are all there to sort of redistribute a given amount of output. To the supply-siders, to the growthists, it's a very different view of the world. is that the primary function of the state is to create a political economy of growth so that it provides more jobs, more output, more employment production to lift all members of society up, to make everyone more prosperous. It's one is to create more wealth and one is to redistribute what you have, and the two there. Are you with me? Are all of you? These are the basic assumptions, and I'm going to go through the major kingdoms of macroeconomics and show you how they impact policies. Now, there should be no illusions here today. I am a supply-sider. I am a classical economist. I think that's the model that works best, but I hope I'm describing it to you correctly as I go through it. And I'm going to look at imagine a macroeconomics textbook, the classic one. There are 5 sections of this macroeconomic textbook. The first section is taxation. That's a great big area of macroeconomics. Second section, government spending. All right? Third section, monetary policy, stability, inflation, all the monetary stuff, prices, et cetera. You with me in that? The third section is regulations. And the fourth section is international trade. And I'm going to go through each of these with you, maybe not that slowly, because I do have a time constraint. You guys will leave, bored, all that. But I will go through these with you. In taxes, what I do, and I do this in all the grand kingdoms, I talk a lot about taxes. But the reason I do is because it's so easy to explain, easy to show, easy to do. It's not that taxes are the most important thing always in economics. They aren't. But it's much easier to explain taxes than it is regulations or than it is monetary policy or some of these others. It's easier. So I always use that as an example. But when you look at taxes per se, what I try to do in all of these is to define the North Star. What is the perfect tax policy? And when you look at it, what is the North Star for taxation? And with regard to taxation, the key here is, from my standpoint, is that we have a requisite amount of revenue we need to raise in order to fund government, to have government do the job it's supposed to do. And what you want to do is you want to set up a set of tax policies that does the least damage to the economy in raising the requisite revenues for it. I look at it as all taxes are bad, but some are worse than others. What you want to do is raise taxes in the least damaging fashion to collect the requisite revenues for government so that you can have the public services you so desperately want and need in society. That's my view of it. When you look at it this way, the generic solution, the North Star, is really pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. You want your tax policy to have the lowest possible tax rate on the broadest possible tax base. All right? And the reason you do that is you want the lowest possible tax rate to provide people with the least incentives to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report taxable income. So you have the least disincentive effect. And you have the broadest tax base with the least deductions, exemptions, exclusions, credits, write-offs, omissions, whatever, so that they have the least number of places they can stick their income in order to avoid taxation. So here you look at taxes and you want the lowest possible tax rate on the broadest possible tax base. Then what I do from here on taxes is I look at the tax bill that's presented and I analyze that tax bill and ask myself the question, does that tax bill move us closer to the North Star of taxation or does it move us further away? And when you look at this, you can see clearly an administration that want to raise tax rates, and that's a move away from that tax, from the ideal tax. Those that want to cut the tax rates, broaden the base, get rid of deductions, those move us towards the tax base, towards the North Star, do it there. You can think of it this way. I mean, my best example of one of the best policies that was ever done was Ronald Reagan's in 1980s. Obviously, you know I worked with him very closely for all those years and before. That he cut the highest marginal income tax rate in America from 70% to 28%. Is that a good enough cut for you? Yeah. Okay. He not only cut the highest rate, he went from 11 tax brackets to 2 tax brackets. He raised the lowest rate from 12.5% to 15%. Clearly, solidly growthist. He cut the corporate tax rate from 46% to 34%. And right along with the supply-side model, He got rid of tax deductions, exemptions, exclusions, all what they called loopholes to pay for that tax, so it was statically revenue neutral, this 86 Tax Act. That is the best policy from the standpoint of moving towards the North Star. I'm not going to criticize others. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of President Trump in 2017. If you look at that, they lowered the highest corporate tax rate from 34% or 35% to 21%. Broadened the base, reduced the personal income tax from 39.6 to 37, put through pass-throughs, reduced the inheritance tax, all the same thing. If you look at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I mean, in the 2 years of that, from the fourth quarter of 2017 through the third quarter of 2019, government revenues, federal government revenues went way up. They didn't go down as everyone said they would. They went way up. Now, it is true that corporate tax rate revenues went down, but all the other federal tax revenues went up to more than compensate for the corporate revenues going down. If you look at, so they went up by more relative to the prior 2 years than they had the prior 2 years from the prior 2 years to that. So it paid for itself in the first 2 years. If you look at poverty, growth in the economy, all of that, I could go through it with you. But growth was extraordinarily exceptional during that period. Poverty went to its lowest levels, especially in the most disadvantaged members of society. I could go on. Our growth rate relative to Europe would have been the same for the 2 years up to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. All of a sudden, it just diverged dramatically. At the end of the next 2 years, the U.S. GDP was 2.5% higher than it would have been had it grown at the European growth rate. So, this is a supply side examples, one of which, and I'm going to just do here with you, and I'm going to spend more time on taxes than I probably should. But I have a group of economists who are opposed to my way of thinking, and I'm opposed to their way of thinking intellectually. They're nice guys. I like them. I was in graduate school with all of them. I got better grades. And I was a professor. They were a professor. I taught at the University of Chicago. I got ranked all my way through tenure professorship there. So they're friends, but they have a different view of the world. If you know Saez or Piketty or Zencheva or Zuckman, you can see this group there. They look at the income tax codes and they look at income inequality and they look at the codes and they come to the conclusion that we should raise taxes on the rich and lower taxes on the poor, and that's their study. Now, I have a book that just came out 2 years ago, doing fairly well. It's called Taxes Have Consequences. And this book is a complete review of the U.S. federal income tax system from its inception in 1913 to the present. All right? We have every single tax return, people. We have everyone. The tax code started in 1913 with the last 2 months, November and December. People were required to file their income taxes. 358,000 people were required to file income taxes at the federal level. The highest tax rate went from 0 to 7%. That was the highest tax rate in 1913. There were 358,000. That's out of about 62 million adults at that time. So it's a very small group of people required to file. And the progression went from 0 to 7%, which was like teeny tiny, nothing like we have today. That stayed the same for two years, 13, 14, and 15. Then they popped it up by 1918. The highest marginal income tax rate was raised from 7% to 77%. Just factual. Not only that, but the number of people required to file went from 358,000 to 6.5 million. Now, they did have a World War I. They did have a pandemic. That's all true. But then there was a big race of 1920 where the Republicans won. They cut the rate back from 77% down to 25%. Then we had the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 19. I could go on. We raised the highest tax rate starting with Hoover, from 25 to 63%, then on up to 94%. The highest tax rate was 94% in 1944. Then it dropped after World War II. Then Eisenhower raised it back up again with the Korean War to 91%, where it stayed. Then Kennedy dropped it from 91 to 70. I could go on, and then Reagan dropped it down to 28%. What I'm trying to tell you here, and I'm not trying to prove to you I know the numbers, I do, but I'm trying to tell you that we have huge variation in these data. We have every single tax return. We know, not the name, but we know the tax return of the last guy in the top 1%. We know the tax return of the first guy and the bottom 99%. We got those tax returns. We look at it. You know, bottom line is I don't give a damn about your opinion. This is about facts, not how you feel. And you know, I don't care how you give your podium speeches and stuff like that. We have these data. And I want to go through the central conclusion of our book. There are lots of fun chapters, and there are all sorts of personal stuff, and it's cool. If you look at chapter 2, all the ways the rich people were able to avoid paying taxes through tax shelters and get around, all that. It's really fun. But we have the central features of this book, and it's a fact. Every single time we raise the highest marginal tax rate on the top 1% of income earners, 3 things happened. Number 1, the economy underperformed, and sometimes by a lot. The Great Depression, the World War II. I mean, you look at Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter. Every time you've raised the highest marginal income tax rate, the economy has underperformed. 1. Every time you've raised the highest marginal income tax rate, every single time, tax revenues from the top 1% of income earners declined. Every single time. And every single time you raise the highest marginal income tax rate on the top 1% of income earners, the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised were hammered. And believe me when I tell you this, you know, during Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, what I call the largest assemblage of bipartisan ignorance probably ever put on planet Earth, it wasn't fun being poor then. During the Great Depression, it was far from fun being poor. It was no fun being poor from 1913 to 1908, believe me. You know, these are the 3. Every time we've lowered tax rates on the top 1% of income earners, the economy has outperformed. It really has. You can look at the go-go 60s. You can look at the Reagan period. You can look at the Trump period. You can look at Harding and Coolidge. You can look at all of these periods. I mean, frankly, every time we've cut tax rates on the rich, the economy has outperformed. Every time we've lowered tax rates on the rich, every time, rich have paid more in taxes. And I mean, really have paid a lot more in taxes. Every time we've lowered tax rates on the rich, the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised, the bottom echelons of the economic ladder have improved. That is the period. This is the model of taxation. You can see the battles going on. You can see how I look at the world. You can see how the others look at the world. You can go to their works, and I've always tried to debate them all, but they aren't really very willing to do it. And by the way, in the book, Taxes Have Consequences, I've used their numbers, literally from their books, Piketty's book and all of the study for the inequality of income. So, you with me on that? That's the second one, the second grand kingdom, which really is important as well, and that's government spending. And we all know we need government spending. I mean, you know, what would we do without schools, without defense, without highways, without a judiciary, without police, fire? I mean, I could go on and on and on. We need government spending, and we really do, and I'll be the first to not only confess it, I like it. And if the government doesn't have enough spending, the economy will underperform. But also it's true, if the government has too much spending, the economy will also underperform. There is a sweet spot in there that is the right level of government spending. That's all. And the way I look at that sweet spot is I look at it this way. I said, when the damage done by the last dollar of taxes collected is a beep, 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 less than the benefit done by the last dollar spent, you stop already. That's the right level of government spending. Anything more than that is too much. Anything less than that is too little. Now, when I look at the world today, I see the U.S. being way overspending is my perspective on it. But I'm not against government spending at all, but I am against stimulus spending, and I will explain to you why, because it's way outside of the government function. And let me, if I can, just tell you, in 1910, total government spending was less than 3% of GDP. And we, in that, up until 1913, when we put in the income tax, if the government spending was about 3%, a little bit less, between 2.5% and 3%, we built the most powerful economic powerhouse on the planet Earth with that level of government spending with no income tax. Just for the record, just so you know. Now, I could go through a lot of that stuff, and I'm sure they have other arguments, but Government spending there. Now, the reason I go on government spending, and I'm going to give you their explanation of the world first. I was in London with Larry Summers. He was giving his lectures at the Financial Times, which is sort of fun, and he was trying to explain stimulus spending in the government and what the government was doing. This was under Obama, and it doesn't matter. I'm not picking on Larry Summers or Obama. This is the traditional model. He said, look, if you give a guy $600 that the guy had heretofore not had, that guy will spend more than he otherwise would have spent had he not had that $600. Pretty clear? Pretty obviously true. That in turn will create jobs, output, employment, and higher incomes on the group that's going to produce the goods and services that that guy is now going to buy that he otherwise would not have bought had he not had the $600 stimulus spending. You with me on that? And those people will have higher incomes, they'll spend more, and there'll be this cascading effect through the economy, you with me, that lifts the economy up by the bootstraps. I'm going to be a little nerdy with you just to prove you I know it. It's you take the stimulus spending, the $600, and you take it over times 1 over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume, which is the multiplier, and you get the total increase in total spending. You then distribute it over different quarters, and you get the Keynesian effect. You all follow me? And with that, Larry Summers, that's it. And he goes and sits down, which shocked me a little bit. Now, when I look at this, I think Larry Summers is 100% correct, that if you give guys $600, he will spend more than he otherwise would have spent. That will create jobs, that will create higher income, and there will be an increase in output and employment and production by 600 times the multiplier. He's completely correct on that. But he's not totally correct. He's correct as far as he goes, but there are 2 other chapters to this book. It is true that transfer recipients will spend more, and that will create an increase in output, employment, and production. That's true. But in this world of ours, government doesn't create resources. Government redistributes resources. So everything you give to one person, you got to take from someone else. It's just the Slutsky equation. That's all it is, and I say that to be nerdy with you. It's just that spending is not a free thing coming out of some schmoo, for those of you old enough to remember Al Cap. All right? It comes from another group. So the transfer payers, they'll have $600 less than they otherwise would have had, won't they? Won't this mean that they will spend something less than they otherwise would have spent had they not had the $600 taken? Won't those people who used to be producing the goods that they were used to be buying and now are not buying, they'll have lower incomes too? Won't they then spend less, and there'll be this cascading effect in the opposite direction that exactly upsets? The stimulant effect to the transfer recipient is 100% offset by the destimulative effect of the transfer payer, by the hour, by the day, by the week, by the month, by the year, by the century, to the 9,367th decimal place. Income effects in an economy of a price change always sum to zero. Always sum to zero, period. That's the second chapter. So when you hear it called a stimulus spending, it's not. It's stimulus spending to the transfer recipient, but destimulus spending to the transfer payer. You with me on this, please? Make sure you see the logic. You can yell at me later. But there's a third chapter, and the third chapter is ugly. And I loathe to tell you this one. But the third chapter is the substitution effects do not cancel. The substitution effects accumulate. I was testifying before Gaylord Nelson of Senate Finance in 1974 when Jerry Ford's tax rebate was going on. And I was there with Otto Eckstein, Paul McCracken, and Gardner Ackley, 3 amazing giants in the economic profession, stalwarts, but all Keynesians, was there. And I was trying to explain to the senator from Wisconsin, Gaylord Nelson, about the substitution effects. And I just couldn't get my arms around it. I couldn't get the words out. Finally, I just said to him, I said, Senator, if these other 3 professors, by the way, I was 33 at the time, if these other 3 professors are correct, what the heck's the matter with you? Why stop at $600, for God's sakes? Don't you love America? Why not $6,000? Why not $60,000, $600,000? Why not 100% of GDP? So everyone who works and produces receives nothing, and all those who don't work and don't produce receive everything. What do you think would happen to GDP, Senator? And he goes, well, it'd go to zero. Of course it would. And then he turned and looked at the other three and said, you've just heard Dr. Laffer's comments. What are your responses to this? Well, in the long run, in the big picture, that's true. But in the range we're working about, it goes the other way. Well, you can see the two differences in models. It's what I call the transfer theorem. And I'm going to dwell on this because all of public policy today is government spending. I mean, not all, but huge, huge segment of it. And it's really directed to these theorems. All right? It's what I call the transfer theorem. And the transfer theorem is math. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not liberal, it's not conservative, it's not left-wing, it's not right-wing, it's not tall, it's not short, it's not fat, it's not skinny, it's not black, it's not white. It's math. You know, and again, a transfer occurs when you give anyone resources based upon some characteristic other than work effort, and you take those resources from someone else. Okay? You with me on this? That's a transfer. Now, transfers can occur from young people to old people. Whoo, that's my type of transfer. Other transfers can go from tall people to short people. I like that one too. You know, from skinny people to fat people. Give me a break. Keep it going. But generally, we talk about transfers when they occur between those who have a little bit more to those who have a little bit less. That's what we usually talk about in transfers. That's how it's usually to help the poor, but whatever. I'm going to go through this with you verbally, but it's math. And I'm going to use the example of a transfer from those who have a little bit more to those who have a little bit less. You with me? That's the example I'm going to use. Now, when you take from those who have a little bit more, you reduce their incentives to produce, and they will produce a little bit less. Any objections? If you then take those proceeds and give those proceeds to those who have a little bit less, you will provide them with an alternative source of income other than working, and they too will work a little bit less. If you give a frustrated greeter at Walmart $100,000, my bet is that he won't work overtime that week. Am I going over your heads on this? In a simple sense of the word, if you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work, do I need to say the next sentence to you? There, no? When you give it to those who have a little bit less, you provide them with an alternative source of income other than working, and they too will work a little bit less. The theorem here, and it's math, it's not opinion, it's math. Whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income, period. Period. Now, the lemma from this theorem is really cool. I love it. I'm not going to prove it to you verbally the way I did the transfer theorem itself, but the lemma is really cool, and I think you'll see it intuitively. The more you redistribute, the greater the transfer, the bigger the reduction in production will be. Okay, that should be obvious to you. But now what I want to take you through is the one that has a spicy garlic flavor. It's like it's the escargot without the snail, you know. Oof, my eyes water. I love it so much. If you were able, this is the limit function of this theorem. If you were able to redistribute income in such a way that everyone came out exactly the same, there will be no income whatsoever. And God, I wish Bernie Sanders were here today, or Elizabeth Warren, or AOC. And let me prove this to you, and I want to prove it to you. In order to get everyone to come out exactly the same, what you would have to do is you'd have to tax everyone above the average income 100% of the excess. And you'd have to subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income. Only in this way can you be assured that everyone will come out exactly the same. Now, if you actually did that, if you actually taxed everyone above the average income 100% of the excess, and if you actually subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income, I will stipulate today, Counselor, we'll all be equal at zero. There will be no income whatsoever. I used to try to explain this to my students, and of course my students had never worked for a living. You know, they were students, what the heck, you know. They didn't know who that FICA guy was who takes all that income, you know. And So I tried to make the example that would fit their lifestyles. So I would tell them that if I ran this class the way your government runs your country, what I would do is I'd flunk all the A students out and I'd give all the F students scholarships. Now before you giggle, don't giggle. If you were to do that, if you were to flunk all the A students out and give all the F students scholarships, my A students happen to be a little bit smarter than my F students. And when you change the rules, my A students would never guess a correct answer. They would always get then the lowest grades in the class. The F students would get the highest grades in the class. All the A students would still get all the scholarships. All the F students would still be flunked out. I would not have changed the distribution of grades one iota. But what would I have done? I would have destroyed the entire quality of the educational process. I'm going to tell you this succinctly here. If you look at history of the world, every single revolution on planet Earth has been fought to change the distribution of income, and none of them have ever succeeded. But they all have succeeded in destroying income and destroying value and wealth in this world. This is the government spending. I'm going to touch on the next one kingdom, which is monetary policy. What you want to have in monetary policy, the North Star. You want a low-rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint. Then what you want is sound money. What you want is a money system that stays constant in value for now and forevermore, so we can all do contracts with each other and know that the value of that contract 10, 15, 20 years from now will be the same value. We can all have good capital markets. That's the purpose. There's nothing that can bring an economy to its knees faster than hyperinflation and high interest rates. You can see it historically. The sound money one, I'm not going to go through with you, but what you need is a price rule on sound money. I'll give you the example here. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was formed at the same time the income tax was put into place. That was the first move the federal government has made to nationalize and take control and monopolize money in the system. Prior to 1913, money was private. Banks created bank notes. There were no printing of money. There was no money supply. Banks printed bank notes. You traded bank notes. You knew the bank. It had the little name of the bank on it and all that. Some notes sold at discounts to other notes because of the balance sheets of the banks and weren't as, all of this stuff. By the way, that was the same in Britain with Scottish notes versus English notes back when I lived in Britain in 1970. So there were discounts on the Scottish notes there. The government did have three functions. The three functions government had were, number one, it defined a dollar as being 1/20th of an ounce of gold, or 1 ounce of silver, troy ounce. Okay? It defined what a dollar was. The government also had a mint, where they minted, you took in bullion, they minted coins. You took in the bullion, you paid them a commission, and they minted coins for you, put in the silver. By the way, there were lots of private mints all over the country, and I don't think the government mints had any huge control of that market at all. But the one thing the government did do that was really good was it audited all the banks. It went through and looked at their balance sheets, their income statements, and made sure that their accounting and their balances and their reserves that they reported were true and factual, which is a wonderful thing. But prior to 1913, it was private money in the U.S. Following 1913, there was a steady progression where the government finally, in 1933, we devalued the dollar from $20.67 an ounce to $35 an ounce. Roosevelt declared it illegal for any Americans to hold gold. As you know, we completely got rid of gold and other silver and any other monetary means. Banks were not allowed to buy or sell foreign exchange during the 33 Bank Holiday Act. It was amazing. Then you get the Smithsonian Accord, which I was in the White House at that time. Paul Volcker and I were the two unwilling to give up our position on gold. We lost, they won. We got rid of gold. We no longer would support gold in the international markets. We had completely monopolized that, and on up to the present day with Powell. You can see the whole thing there. From 1750 until 1913, the inflation in the U.S., what was that, 1750? That's 150. That's 163 years. Inflation, now prices went up and down, but the aggregate amount of inflation in that period was zero. There was no systematic inflation. A dollar was worth in 1913, exactly what it had been worth in 1750. Since that time, the price level in the U.S. has gone up 33-fold, 3,300%. You can see the difference between us and them, again, between the demand-siders there. You go to regulations, and I'll just, by the way, I think the whole thing today of Bitcoin and gold, the whole thing today is literally markets now trying to find a safe haven money, and they're trying to recreate a private money. And they're doing, you can see the price of Bitcoin's gone way up, price of gold's gone way up. They're searching desperately to find a global money that is not controlled by government. And it's an interesting thing. They're not there yet by any means, but that's what they're trying to do. Regulations. We all know we need regulations. You can't wake up one day and drive on the left-hand side of the road, and next day you drive on the right-hand side of the road. We all know we need regulations, and we need a lot of them. I mean, we really do, and I mean that in all sincerity. But what you want to make sure you don't do, you don't want to go beyond the specific purpose at hand and create a lot of collateral damage from regulations that way outweigh the benefits from the regulation itself. Now, when I look at regulations like energy regulations, some of these others, I think we've gone way beyond. So in this one, you have a low-rate, broad-based flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, and minimal regulations. You know, back in the early 1970s, stock prices, you couldn't trade stock prices. It was illegal to trade stock without charging a 34-cent fee per share. Then there was May Day in 1974 or 75 where all of a sudden commissions were freed, and now today it's zero. I mean, literally you can buy and sell stocks for less than a tenth of a penny. There's no charge. I mean, we had airline deregulation. You know, you see that the fares came way down, safety went way up. I mean, trucking deregulation. I could go on and on. The one I like most of all that's never mentioned is Hubert Humphrey's famous boondoggle, which was, do you know MSRP? You've seen that on products, manufacturer's suggested retail price. Before, it wasn't suggested. It was illegal to sell a product produced by a company below the company's price. You could not do it. Discount houses were illegal. There was no Walmart. There was no any of these other things, Lowe's, any of these discount stores. We got that trend. We derated. Look at how the discount stores have been competitive and created. I mean, it is amazing. Minimal regulations. That's where I'm coming out on that. Low rate, broad-based flat tax, spending restraints, sound money, minimal regulation. The last one I want to get on with you, and you're going to get upset with me here, so forgive me. Free trade. Free trade. This is my specialty area. My dissertation was in trade. My first textbook was pure trade theory. I know trade backwards and forwards. It's my field. And there is nothing that has done more to create prosperity than free trade. And it comes in two forms. The first form is the trade deficit. Now, if you look at it, the trade deficit is nothing more and nothing less than our exports are less than our imports. Okay? The trade deficit is also nothing different than domestic savings versus domestic investment. That's accounting. When investment exceeds savings, you have a trade deficit, which is called a capital surplus. If I take a machine out of Japan, put it on a boat in Tokyo Harbor, send it over to the U.S., and take it off the boat in the U.S. and put it up in Colorado and start it running, that machine being put on a boat in Tokyo Harbor is called an export. That machine being offloaded in the U.S. is called an import. All right, you're taking up to Colorado, where it's a new piece of capital up in Colorado that's no longer in Hokkaido. All right? It's a Japanese export, a Japanese trade surplus. It's a U.S. import, a U.S. trade deficit. It's a U.S. capital surplus. It's a Japanese capital deficit, period. You know, we survived as a country. We ran trade deficits, capital imports, from 1640 until 1870. Now that's how many years? Is that 230 years we did it? We ran trade deficits. 7 years we didn't. Out of that 230 years, there were 7 that we had trade surpluses. And guess what years those were? 1775 and 1776. For some reason, the Brits weren't willing to ship goods to us. I don't know why. 1811 and 1812, 2 more years. For some reason, they didn't like that one either. There was also the one of the banks, the canal collapses in 1842 to 1844, 3 years there where the canals collapsed. Britain and Holland had funded all of those canals, and they were guaranteed by the states, and bang, the canals went under, and Britain got irritated. I don't know why. Every one of the loans was defaulted upon in the system, and they allowed Rothschild made a very famous speech. America will never get another penny from those of us in Europe. They treat us so badly. Well, that was true for about 3 years, but then boom, they started putting money. Capital surpluses created the prosperity of America. Without those machines, we had the land, we had the labor, we had the skills, and that capital allowed us to become the preeminent nation on planet Earth, pure and simple. Without that, we would not be America today. Trade deficits are great for growth countries, and they're great for investors. If you don't have the returns in your country, wouldn't you like to make higher returns in another country? And do you know what happened when we owed too much money to foreigners? Do you know what we did? We opened up immigration to those people who had investments in the U.S., and when they moved here, that was no longer owed to foreigners anymore. You got to be paying attention. That's a joke. It's also true. The second thing about trade that's so important is comparative advantage. We make some things better than foreigners, and they make some things better than we do. We and they would be foolish if we didn't sell them those things we make more efficiently than they do, and they sell us those things they make more efficiently than we do. It's called the gains from trade, comparative advantage, win-win, David Ricardo. I don't care what you want to call it. It's great. These are the economic policies. And trade, free trade, is absolutely essential. And I'm going to say this one to you here. Trade should never, ever, ever become an international political tool for affecting foreign policy. Ever, ever, ever. No, I'm not suggesting that we should sell nuclear weapons to Kim Jong-un. I'm not suggesting that. But trade is an economic policy, not a political policy. If you don't like foreigners and you want to yell at them, use the State Department. That's what the State Department's all about. Tell them off. And if you really don't like them and you want to shoot them, we have a Defense Department. We go out, just shoot them. But don't use trade as a political tool, period. And it is especially important that we trade with foreigners that we don't like. It's especially important. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. These are countries we should be trading with, and the reason why? Because when you would trade with people and you do business with them and you make money with them, don't you like your customers? Don't you like your suppliers, your business? Hey, it's fun. Hey, by the way, what are you guys doing with the Uyghurs up in North China there? I mean, what are you guys doing with that? That's not nice. Yeah, but what about what you guys are doing to the blacks in Alabama? Well, you talk things over with friends. You send them birthday cards, Christmas cards, anniversary things. You sit down and you talk your problems out. You don't boycott them. You don't get them to hate you. You know, and it's especially true of foreign investment. If China has a lot of investments in the United States, if they have a lot of capital investment in the U.S., they're much more loath to bomb us than if they don't own anything in the U.S. If they do a lot of business with us and they also own a lot of assets in the U.S., they don't want to fight us. They don't want to bomb us. You know, never should trade be used. We have put sanctions on Cuba since 1959. We've had sanctions on Cuba for 65 years now. Really teach them a lesson there, you. I mean, you can see how it's worked. Cuba now says, oh, God, thank you, America, for putting those sanctions on us for 65 years, because we now see the truth, beauty of Americans' way of life, free market, democratic, economic capitalism. It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for teaching us. Not. They hate us more than ever. When you stop trading, people hate. And when they start hating, they go to war. Bob Mundell, in his Nobel laureate speech, made the point that it was the Smoot-Hawley tariff that caused the Great Depression. And it was the Great Depression that caused World War II, period. That's it. You know, when you look at trade, I know of nothing more important for economic growth, for prosperity, and for peace in this world than free trade. I could take you through policies. You know how many wars we had under Reagan. None. We created the prosperity. We tried to bring Russia in, get the peace across, and Reagan did it. He got him. We opened up China there. I mean, I was the first American to go to modern China in 1970. In October of 1970, I did the pre-Kissinger trip. I went there. I'm going to hate those Chinese bastards. I fell in love with China. It was just wonderful. I mean, here you got the way to do it. Low rate broad-based, a flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, minimal regulations, and free trade. And then get your stinking socialist government paws off my economy, you dirty left-wingers, and let the free market solve the issue. Thank you very much. I'll throw her open for questions.
Just to comment on wealth redistribution, I always ask my students two things. The first is, with whom are we going to equalize? People in, say, Tennessee
Sure.
or the United States or around the world? We have to answer that.
You're right.
And the second is, how often are you going to rebalance? Because just suppose we took the United States and rebalanced, how long would it be before Taylor Swift had more money than you did? And we need to do it again.
1 second. She would have more money that second.
I just want to ask a question.
Sure.
About what you said on how trade can be used as a tool to build diplomatic relations with other countries. Do you ever think that there are cases in which sanctions or embargoes might be justified?
Generically, no. Generically, no. Now, there are certain products I would not allow to be traded. For example, I wouldn't sell, as I said, Kim Jong-un nuclear weapons. I wouldn't do that. But that, other than those restrictive areas, no. I really don't. I really don't have any fear of China. I mean, when I look at China and I look at some of these, which would you rather have? Chinese companies located in the United States producing goods and services, or U.S. companies located in China producing goods and services? Here in China, they're not going to be the problem. They're under our control. The last thing they want is to lose their capital, period. So, and I also terribly, if you and I sat down and decided certain sanctions, et cetera, certain things on products, I think we could work something out, but we're not doing that. Basically, you're dealing with government officials and Congress. And when I look at Congress and government officials and hear what they say and see what they do, they are far less competent to handle any type of sanctions or regulations than the first 50 people in the Chattanooga phone book. I mean, just because you find a mistake in the private market does not mean a government solution is warranted. It doesn't. But I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Can you give a quick assessment? Harris is elected, what happens? Trump is elected, what happens?
I really can't, but I can give you an assessment of what Trump did. That I'll do that. And remember, I'm an economist. I don't talk about social issues, abortion, pornography, but all this stuff. I don't. And I not only don't talk about it, I really don't have much opinion on it and what goes on there. But economics I really am into, and I really think I know something about it. And I will tell you that it is my view that Donald Trump, in the first term of his presidency, was the single best president from the standpoint of economics in U.S. history. That's my view. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that I mentioned to you earlier, I think was an enormous mistake. He avoided the mistake Reagan made, the mistake Kennedy made, the mistake that Coolidge made, which was phasing the tax cuts in. If you know that taxes are going to be lower next year than they are this year, you'll defer all the income, all the production, you will. That's why we had the deep recession in 81, 82. That's why we had the big recession before the roaring 20s. That's why we had the big recession in 61, 62, before the Kennedy tax cuts took effect. He avoided that. When the pandemic hit, he was able to marshal the resources to be able to get a vaccine in less than 10 months. The estimates were at that time it would take 7 or 8 years going through the regulations. He took $1 trillion, which may have been a little too much, but hey. And not only did he do that, but he circumvented the regulations and was able to get a truly effective vaccine before the end of 2020, which is pretty impressive. He also did the one and got it passed with, thank God, with a bunch of Democrat support, especially my student, Jared Polis, who's the governor of Colorado, gay, Democrat, great guy, good tax cutter. He was able to get the right to try passed. And that right to try, if you've got a terminal disease, your right to try, you don't have to get FDA approval. Donald Trump also was able to get not only the tax cuts thing, but he also got a medical transparency, price transparency in medical and executive order, which I think is the most important thing in the next 5 years to create prosperity in America, that you need to know what the prices are, the real prices are for medical services, and what the real description of what the benefits and risks are for those. That, I think, is a game changer for the world. I also think that decontrol of energy is what he did, and with that, we became energy independent during his term, and we are the cleanest producers of energy. I don't know about global warming. I'm not an expert in that field, but Al Gore and I do a lot of stuff together. If you look at his book, The Future, there are three of us who did the blurbs on his book. Berners-Lee, myself, and E.O. Wilson were the three who did the blurbs on his book. He's a real polymath. I think if there is global warming, the way you do it is a carbon tax and offset by an income tax rate reduction of the exact same size of the carbon tax to not destroy the economy. I mean, that's the way you go there. I think Trump on energy is very correct on that. Lastly, it was one that not most people don't talk about, but I will talk about it here. The Supreme Court appointments that he did. They get a lot of heat for stuff not in my area. But in my area, in economics, they overturned the regulatory body's ability to legislate without passing Congress. And that's a big, big plus. So when I look at Donald Trump, that's what I think. What he will do in the second term, I don't know, but I'm guessing he'll do the same thing times 10 in the second term. I do not know what Hillary, well, not Hillary. I do know what Hillary would have done. But Kamala Harris, I'm much less worried about Kamala Harris than most people are. I don't think she's here because she's a strident, doctrinal person. She likes to be popular. She always has liked to be popular. She giggles and laughs. But she's seems like a very nice person. And the last thing she wants is to be hated and despised and disliked. So I think that if she were to be elected president, I think she'd be very, very sensitive to what her policies were, how they were received. And if her policies were not received well, she'd be like Bill Clinton and change those policies. My view is that she's very much like Bill Clinton. And just for the record, I voted for Bill Clinton twice, and not in that party's primary, believe me. But I did, and I thought he was a great president. So I'm not nearly as worried about Kamala as other people are, but I may be way off base. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Sorry, there's one here.
Just a quick follow-on question on free trade from the gentleman in the front row. With regards to China and the fact that they've got industrial policies where the federal government is dramatically subsidizing certain industries, creating what one could argue is an unfair advantage from a competitive point of view, what is your point of view on that as opposed to free trade on an even footing?
To call it fair trade. Fair trade versus free trade is what this is the nomenclature there. When I go shopping and I see a company, a store, that's selling products below all the other stores and it's losing money, do I say, gosh, I shouldn't shop here because they are not using fair trade with the others, they're undercutting those other companies, and I shouldn't buy the highest quality, cheapest price thing? No. Let's imagine that someone wanted to let's imagine that Japan said, America, we love you so much. You're really great. We just love you and all that you've done. We want to give you all of our cars free of charge as a gift from us. We have antitrust legislation to stop those bastards from doing that type of thing. How dare they give us gifts like that and destroy our product? What you want out of trade is you want the best products at the lowest price. And if they want to subsidize their products and sell them below cost, I'll take them all day long and twice on Sunday. All of this stuff about you got to charge us above retail, otherwise you're not being fair, is ridiculous. We want to get the best quality products we can at the lowest possible price, and it's not whether we produce the products or not. It's whether we are able to get our income going further. So I do not worry about industrial policy in other countries. Now, we do have anti-monopoly laws. I like those laws. I like antitrust laws. So if there's a monopoly concept that they're going to sell it below cost and then next year triple the price, that you have laws against, and I fully support those laws. But I think really domestic consumer groups and domestic manufacturers are far better at figuring out what we should do with foreign trade than the federal government is for trying to assess whether, in fact, it's unfair trade. Every time I hear a politician talk about it, it's the stupidest comments I've ever heard. And they don't understand even how to handle the ones they listen to or look at. You follow me? I like people who give me expensive gifts. And I like stores that sell me high-quality products at low cost.
Thank you, Dr. Laffer. Quick question on something that doesn't get much attention, but I think is probably fairly significant. What do you think the most likely outcome is if the Social Security Trust Fund, the largest intergenerational transfer of wealth, is allowed to go insolvent?
Yep. Can I make this a broader question? Let me broaden this question. You're talking about the unfunded liabilities of Social Security is what you're really talking about, which is a subset of U.S. debt. And we've got a debt issue. How many people hear about, oh my God, do you know that U.S. debt at the end of Clinton was 24% of GDP and now it's 130% of GDP? Excuse me. I'm hyperventilating. You know, first place, when looking at debt, and I'm just going to do the debt issue, it is totally inappropriate ever to look at debt compared to GDP. GDP is a flow, and debt is a stock. You never compare a stock with a flow or a flow with a stock. If you're talking about a business, you look at balance sheet items compared to balance sheet items, and income and cash flow items to income and cash flow items. You never combine a cash flow item with a balance sheet item, ever, ever, ever. Now, if you do that, what you should do if you want to scare people is look at debt compared to total U.S. wealth, and we have very good measures for that. If you look at that number, it's not terrifying. You're not sitting in the edge of the cliff, okay, I'm going, jumping out of the building. No, no. It's high. It's higher than it should be, but it's not crazy, horrible high that you want to kill yourself. If you want to look at flow to flow, look at debt service to GDP, and again, it's too high. It should be lower than that, but you're nowhere near a panic state, period. All right? That's number one. And you should never look at total debt. You should only look at debt to the public, not intra-governmental debt, which you should net out. And if you net out the intra-governmental debt, it would go from 130% of GDP to 105% of GDP. So, you know, you with me on that? Don't panic. Don't scare your dogs and your cats and your kids and try to, oh my God, we're at the end. It's a problem, but it's not a problem that we can't solve. Now, I want you to think about debt thing. Debt is a tool. It is neither good nor bad. It's a tool. It's a way of transferring resources from savers to investors. It's along with equity, along with other things. It's a way of moving from goods and services, resources from savers to investors. All right? Let me explain it to you this way and see. I've got a deal for you. I'm going to let you borrow all you want at 1%. And let you invest all you want, tax-free, risk-free, at 20%. How much would you borrow? Anything you can get your hands on, wouldn't you? Now, reverse those numbers. You can borrow all you want at 20%, and I'll let you invest all you want at 1%. How much are you going to borrow? Zero. It's not debt that matters, it's the spread. It's what you do with the proceeds. If you can borrow at rate cheaper than the investment rate, you borrow and you do the investment. If you can't, you don't. Now, looking at it from this way, I'll tell you what we did in January 20th, 1981, when God still loved America, when the clouds opened and the sun shone forth in the earth, the fields turned green, the animals multiplied, the trees blossomed and bore fruit, and the orphans were let out and found foster homes, and the enemies of America were pushed offshore, and Ronald Reagan was nominated and took office and elected. We came into office and found a country that had been demolished by bad policies. I mean, just demolished. And we dug into the trash heap of what used to be America, and I found this little thin plaque, polished it on my jacket, put it up, it said Enterprise America. And we looked at the country, what do we do with this rubble? Well, what we did is we borrowed lots and lots and lots of money. We did. We ran deficits. Boy, did we run deficits. And what did we do with the money? We cut your tax rates way down to increase incentives to produce and output growth. We built up the defenses so we didn't have to worry about foreign wars. And blah, blah, blah. We did all the other stuff. We cut regulations. We did all that. We cut non-defense spending. And then we sat back and prayed that it would work. And lo and behold, it worked in spades. From January 1st, 1983 to June 30th, 1984, that's 18-month period, 6 quarters, year and a half, is that about it? U.S. real GDP growth in that 18-month period was 12% real growth. Our annual growth rate in those year and a half, our annual compound growth was at 8% per annum compounded. That was Chinese growth rates, guys. That's what happened there. Because we borrowed cheap, we put in the right pro-growth policy. Now let's take W and Obama and Biden. They borrowed all they could and paid people not to work. That's the wrong way to do it. It's not the debt that caused the problem, it's how you use the proceeds. So if you gave me control of this economy for a year and a half, I would be able to reduce that debt problem that you're talking about right now to trivial in no time. Economic growth, you spike that growth and you get that thing going, and you can create a political economy of growth that would absolutely diminish the debt picture very quickly. I hope that answer cures Social Security. I mean, you could cure Social Security just by changing the age of retirement from 67, is it, to 72. I'm 84, and I'm still working full time, and I don't care about Social Security. I mean, just extend the age of retirement, and all of a sudden it's no longer unfunded. It's fully funded. That takes care of it. It's done. And how long did that take me to say that sentence? That's how long it would take to pass the bill. And everyone knows we live longer and we live healthier and should be working longer. Okay. One last one? Or?
One more question.
Okay.
We would mostly stay here all evening, but we're going to have to wrap it
Okay.
up.
I just wish you would talk to Donald Trump about his love of tariffs.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. Don't you think I have talked to Donald Trump and his love for tariffs? I will tell you about one conversation we had. He called me at home, and I was in my couch watching my TV like I do and eating some potato chips. And he wanted to explain to me that he's a free trader. And I've known Donald Trump for years and years and years. Not well, but I've known him for a long time, and I got to know him really well in the first term. And he said, I'm a free trader. And you know, when he says that, I take it as being true. Here's a guy who runs an international company. I know of no one who runs an international company who is not a free trader. Fred Smith and all these guys, they all like free trade because they hate it when governments meddle with their stuff, and they like to buy where it's cheap, sell where they're dear, and all that. So on an intuitive level, any CEO of a large international company is automatically a free trader. I then made a comment which I probably shouldn't have made, but I also said anyone who imports 2 foreign wives also has to be a free trader. He did not laugh. I thought it was a riot, but he didn't. He said, look, Arthur, I am a free trader, but I've got a problem. And the problem is the U.S. is the freest trade large nation in the world. I mean, we're not like Jersey, Guernsey, and Sark, or Isle of Man, or Hong Kong, or some of the other places that are more free trade. But we're by far the freest trade large country in the world. And when I look at countries like Japan or South Korea or the European Union or these other places, all they want to do is run trade surpluses with us. That's all they want to do. All they want. They don't realize that their regulations against us, their non-tariff barriers, their tariffs and all that stuff, and their regulations and quotas, hurts them as well as us. They're just stick in the mud mercantilists. And the only thing they care about the U.S., the only thing they care is about access to our markets. And so when I see all the damage their tariffs, their quotas do to us, I just want so I'm going to threaten them to the ends of the earth with tariffs. I'm going to threaten them and bring them to the negotiation table, because if they lose access to the U.S. market, they won't do anything. So I'm going to do that and bring them there, and then we're going to negotiate a trade deal that's freer trade. This is the conversation. Now, you look at what he says and what he does. We had several trade agreements under Trump when he was president. The USMCA, which is a darn good free trade agreement. The one with Japan was very much pro-free trade. The one with South Korea was. The one I think was really most important was this one. He was at the G7 meeting in Ottawa, okay? And at the G7 meeting, and this is really true what happened. He was at the G7 meeting in Ottawa. He had to leave the meeting early to go to Singapore to meet with Kim Jong-un. All right, he had to leave a little bit early to meet with Kim Jong-un. And so he looked at the other 6 attendees and said, please forgive me, I've got to leave early, but you guys want me to leave early, believe me when I tell you that. I'm meeting with Kim Jong-un, and hopefully we can keep peace on this planet by me going. But before I go, I've got a deal to make with you. He looked at all of us. The U.S. is prepared right now to get rid of all tariffs and all non-tariff barriers and all quotas, if you will too. And they looked at their shoes, they looked at their ceilings, they looked at the walls and whistled and said, see you later, Donald. But he is a negotiator. I am not. When he told me that position that he said, I rolled up in a fetal ball, I started crying, and I crawled under my bed. I'm not, but he is. I hope that story helps you a little bit. I don't know whether it changes any of yours, but I believe this guy is truly a free trader, and if you look at what he did as opposed to what he said, you get a very different picture of trade. Thank you very much, everybody.